All right. Well, we're ready. We can get started. So, but thank you all for joining us for our lunchtime chats with Tlingit and Haida. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Chakiakish Peterson. I'm the president of Tlingit and Haida. We're excited to bring you these forums that we're holding in hopes to help our tribal citizens make informed voting decisions in this 2020 elections. So today's lunchtime chat will be a little bit shorter as we've lined up a 30-minute segment with our United States Senate candidate, Dr. Al Gross. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Gross. We really appreciate you making the time, and if you could introduce yourself to our viewers.
Yeah, well, thank you, Rick, and Gunoshish to everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this forum. I very much appreciate your vote on November 3rd. And I'm a lifelong Alaskan, born and raised in Juneau, grew up all over Southeast. I've been to most of the towns and the villages in Southeast. I'm very familiar with the Tlingit and Haida people and have deep respect for you. And I'm really looking forward to being Alaska's next United States Senator, because I care so much about the state and don't like the direction that it's been going, or the leadership that Dan Sullivan, or the lack of leadership that Dan Sullivan has been showing. So I don't want to take up too much time introducing myself. I think a lot of you know who I am, but we can get into the issues, which is really why what I'm excited to talk with you about.
Well, again, we appreciate you taking the time to join us. As we've been hosting these, we're going to be asking a series of questions. We'll give you a couple minutes to answer those. And Tlingit and Haida is really trying to take a stance of neutrality, nonpartisan, and just hosting those. So the questions will be the same for all the candidates. Yesterday we had Congressman Don Young. Tomorrow we'll have Senator Sullivan and candidate for Congress, Elise Galvin. And we just want to make sure that, again, we're getting the information and making sure that our citizens have the opportunity to hear from the candidates, hear the issues, hear what's motivating you to serve us. So we'll go ahead and get started if you don't mind. And I'll start with the first question. How will you work to ensure that every Alaskan community has a full-time or otherwise adequate public safety and emergency response presence?
Well, first of all, let me say that I very much understand what a terrible problem law enforcement is in rural Alaska, because I've been there and have grown up in many parts of the state or in rural Alaska. And if we can't recruit and retain VPSOs, if we can't have our state-funded law enforcement system under the state troopers cover our villages, then we need a new approach to public safety in Alaska for sure. And the Trump administration has recognized a law enforcement emergency in rural Alaska under the Emergency Federal Law Enforcement Assistance Program. Implementing this program in Indian country and rural Alaska is absolutely critical because, or especially in light of our high per capita crime rate and the unique circumstances of Alaska's geographical and jurisdictional landscape. Funding and implementing long-term measures to support village public safety and victim services is the right thing to do. And outreach must improve, and Native feedback has to be integrated for actionable policy. In this national effort to reshape public safety culture, we need to invest in rural shelters, children's advocacy centers, treatment facilities, and 24-hour crisis lines. And in addition, we need to build out programs like the legal advocacy programs, the community education programs with village outreach components, youth violence prevention programs, and housing programs with traditional houses. Basically, we need a holistic system in place that addresses generational trauma and resultant human pathologies that uniquely harm Native communities. And I applaud the opening of the cold case office in Anchorage and further encourage resources and tribal input into the Alaska Tribal Public Safety Empowerment Act. Ground has been gained on public safety issues, but not enough, and I intend to follow through to ensure continued progress on this front.
Great, thank you. Moving on, do you support the expansion of tribal co-management and the current dual management systems? If so, what will you do to increase support of this in the 117th Congress in your first 100 days?
Well, yes, I do support expansion of tribal co-management, and I've learned a lot about successful tribal fish and wildlife management across the state, including intertribal treaty situations with mixed fish and wildlife populations, be it the Western Alaska Brown Bear Management Association, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish Commission, or Tanana Chiefs Upper Tanana Subregions Fish and Game Advisory Committee. I know you all have to be at the table for effective, sustainable management decisions to be made. And as a hunter and a fisherman from Southeast Alaska, I very much understand that subsistence is a priority, and I need to that I'll champion on behalf of you on rural and Native communities. I'll make sure my colleagues in Washington and our state leaders in Juneau understand and respect that.
Do you support the legislative or administrative fix to address the Marine Mammal Protection Act's blood quantum issues for Alaska Natives? If so, how will you build the support in Washington, D.C. to accomplish this?
Well, using blood quantum to define ethnic identity is troubling. It should not be the government's role to challenge an Indigenous person's identity. That's the problem with it. And I'd like to explore fixes for the system where tribal consultation would be key to strategizing how to work with members in the United States Senate to negotiate a solution for this issue. I'm learning more about the Act and the Native marine mammal groups that manage these species. The International Whaling Commission, the Eskimo Walrus Commission, the Alaska Beluga Whale Committee, and the Alaska Sea Otter and Stellar Sea Lion Commission have all done really good work, and I'm eager to work with them and other tribal leaders to address this complicated issue. I'm looking forward to working with you to help develop language to help reauthorize the Marine Mammal Protection Act.
Great. With the current price of oil and an uncertain future, what are your solutions and priorities to responsibly shore up and diversify our economies, both in our urban centers and our rural communities?
I don't think that's me. No, that's a good question. Well, reducing the cost of healthcare and energy is absolutely necessary if we're going to get economic diversification here in the state and lower the barriers of entry for new businesses to move to Alaska and for economic development in rural Alaska. As these two key costs decline, the economy will diversify as businesses see Alaska as a much more appealing place to live than in the lower 48. And this is even more essential given continued decline in oil production and volatile oil prices, which will continue as long as COVID is going on. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get rid of COVID anytime soon. And our whole economy is being impacted because of that. We need a public health care option and alternative energy sources to accomplish this. You look at Kodiak, they've got 15 cents per kilowatt hour with nearly 100% renewable energy. We can have that in other parts of the state too. Many regional Native nonprofits and arts foundations have moved mountains to cultivate cottage industries for Native artisans, but with limited internet bandwidth, it's holding it back. And I really want to double funding for rural broadband infrastructure to reach the full potential of this industry. As so many jobs are going virtual with COVID, we're seeing that we can have all these economic opportunities even in very rural parts of the state, but they need to be connected with high-speed internet. There are lots of additional ways to diversify our economy, be it extractive, developing alternative energy sources, or nurturing Native arts. And the 8A program for Alaska Native corporations to fulfill government projects and a range of services should also be a model for growth, diversifying services and operations outside of devotion to extraction.
Okay. You know, as we go through this pandemic, what do you think Alaska's economy is going to look like after it?
Well, it's going to be hard. Our economy is going to really be hurting for a long time to come because of COVID, and the failure of Congress to adequately address the economic fallout will only exacerbate the problem. I think we're seeing a structural shift, not a temporary shock, and the post-pandemic economy will very much reflect that. The failure of leadership from the Trump administration and the Senate GOP majority, along with Dan Sullivan, has brought so much economic, health, and social damage to our state. The lockdowns and COVID count in the smallest villages are really unconscionable, and it didn't have to be this way at all. As a doctor, I would never have let it get so out of control in the first place. We need a more coordinated response. I would have listened to experts, and I would have led by example. Alaska's landscape has drastically changed because of this. We've lost our tourism industry, our oil industry is in trouble, and we cannot afford the same old to address these devastating problems. I've listed a number of my ideas, all influenced by consultation with people like you on my website. I encourage you all to go there to read my ideas, and I want to really carry your ideas and input into the language that can help make its way into policy.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Al, what are your thoughts on the federal government's responsibility to respectfully and meaningfully engage with tribal governments?
Statehood and ANCSA came at the unfortunate cost of Native autonomy. And I'm learning about the complexities of ANCSA, ANILCA, the ICWA, and the Indian Self-Determination Act, the Indian Healthcare, the Tribal Transportation Program, and other policies that directly impact Alaska Natives. There's a lot to correct in key legislation that directly impacts tribal identity, land claims, and public access for traditional activities. I will also look critically at issues with guaranteed access to inholdings, transportation, and utility corridors, access for subsistence, and recognition of state authorities concerning fish, wildlife, navigable waters, tidelands, and submerged lands. The federal government has forcefully inserted itself into Native affairs, and these dueling management systems are confusing and contradictory. I want to remind the audience that Dan Sullivan, in his capacity as the state's attorney general and as the Natural Resources Commissioner, consistently sued tribes on all matters of access and subsistence rights, and he sued Katie John. I'm not approaching elected office with that kind of a record, and that's not who I am. I value tribal input and a government-to-government approach. Empowered tribes make for a healthier state, and I'd be very honored to work on your behalf here in the United States Senate.
Well, thank you for that, Al. That concludes the questions that we had prepared, and I'm going to turn now to some questions coming in from our live audience. The first one's from my own mother.
Hi, Paula.
Do you support tribal sovereignty? And if so, will you uphold it even if it means crossing party lines?
Well, I don't care about party lines. I'm not doing this for partisan reasons. I'm an independent, Paula. And yes, I would support tribal sovereignty.
Great. From Lee Miller Sr., Al, what would you do to reverse the Tongass Forest Road issue?
Well, I'll have to look into that when I get there. I don't believe that what President Trump did was right. I do believe that there is some role for a sustainable forestry or timber industry in Southeast Alaska, but the last thing I want to see is whole logs being shipped off to Japan in these massive log rafts. I'm all about value-added products, and if we can lower the cost of healthcare, then we can afford to employ people here in Alaska to do finish work on the timber, like they have at Icy Straits Lumber out in Hoona. It's a great model. It's a small mill. It builds cabins and projects for people. So I would like to see some forestry in Southeast Alaska, but done in conjunction with the people that live there, the indigenous people. And I certainly don't want to see any massive clear cuts of old growth timber.
Great, thank you. I have a question from one of our very own vice presidents, Tasha Hodge. Murdered and missing Indigenous women is an area that needs more than commissions. It needs resource allocations to impact change. Have you thought about how we can get resources to communities to address this challenge of getting justice and closure in these cases?
Well, I put forward a whole plan on my website, and I encourage you to look at it regarding domestic violence and sexual assault and the murdered and missing indigenous people of Alaska. And when I get to the Senate, I'll work really hard to procure funding. I'm not sure where I'm going to get it from, but I'll work really hard to find it.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Jessica Domney. So what is your stance on the recent openings of the Tongass?
Well, I think I just addressed that in the last question, didn't I?
I think so. I just want to make sure we
Yeah.
answer that. And kind of a follow-up also is, what will you do to help with the murdered and missing indigenous women across the country?
Well, I think we need to pursue these cases. You can't just let them drop. And I think justice needs to be served and pursued. So I'll work hard to do that in any capacity that I can, because it's not right.
Great. Well, Dr. Al, that concludes the questions that we've got. And is there anything, I know that you're tight on time, but we have about 15 more minutes on your schedule. Is there anything else that you'd like to touch up on or comment on?
Well, just that I have really deep respect for you and your people and your lands and the stewardship that you've shown over the thousands of years. You're really an amazing people. And I grew up in the Tongass. I grew up alongside of you, and I understand the issues that you face on a day-to-day basis, whether it be the loss of ferries connecting our villages and our towns to the collapse of our fisheries, and I do understand the issue with respect to timber management in the Tongass and your concerns about it and how it might impact our fisheries, our tourism. It's a complicated issue, of course. So I will very much look forward to working with you and would be honored to work alongside you as your United States Senator. And I was very, very approachable as a doctor. For those of you listening that had me as your physician, I think you know that. And I'll be the same way as a United States Senator. I have an open door policy. Fred Johns got arrested right outside Dan Sullivan's office. I would have ordered a pizza or brought him out a cup of coffee and sat down and had a discussion with him, whether I agreed with him or not. And in this case, I did agree with him. But that's the kind of person I am, and I'm a doctor who listens, and I want to do really good things for our state. I grew up in the shadow of some of the state's greatest leaders. Jay Hammond was my role model and almost like an uncle to me growing up. I learned a lot about what I know about Alaska from Jay and leaders like him, going back to Ernest Greening and Bill Egan. And I just never thought I'd get into politics until about 4 or 5 years ago. I saw the state going in the wrong direction, and I thought I had some really good ideas to get it going, and I thought I could win the race. And so here we are, just a few days away from the election. I'm very excited to be in this position. I'm sorry I can't travel to the villages the way I really wanted to, but the last thing in the world I can do is be the doctor that brings the disease to the village. That's just not right. And so I look forward to getting out to the villages again when it's safe to do so. Of course, I've been to most of the villages in Southeast already, but I was looking forward to getting out up the rivers out in Western Alaska and flying around in small planes this spring and summer. But that's the way it is. But we got to get COVID under control so we can get on with our lives. And when I get to the Senate, I'll work really hard to put some sense, make some sense of the management of this problem so that we can move forward. Because at this point, our tourism industry is very, very much in trouble for next summer. And our oil industry is as well, until we can get the country and the world back to a normal, whatever normal is going to be in the future, that is. And I really see internet as a huge opportunity here in Alaska. So many people are working out of their homes right now that there's no reason why they couldn't have a job in Angoon or Cake or Klukwan or any of these villages. And I'm going to work hard to procure funding. And I understand, and I know that you understand as well, that funding is going to be scarce given all the CARES Act money that's coming out, money to help small businesses and individuals just buy food and stay afloat. So we have a lot of work to do. I certainly didn't expect to take office in the middle of a pandemic. That wasn't part of my plan when I stepped up to run. But the fact that we're in the midst of one, sending a doctor to the Senate couldn't be more timely. So I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and listen to you, and I look forward to further encounters like this.
Great. Hey, Dr. Al, we have gotten a few more questions, and we do have about 10 more minutes. So if you don't mind, I'll turn back to those. From Frederick Otilius Olson in Sitka, what will you do to protect Alaskans from the many industrial mining projects across the border in British Columbia?
Yeah, well, hello. I'm on my way to Sitka this afternoon. I'll be down at the net shed out in front of Crescent Harbor this evening. So come on down. We'll talk about that some more. But yeah, the transboundary mines are a big issue. I understand that. And what we need to do, if we're going to ask Canada to clean them up, then we need to be on good terms with Canada. And Trump has been severing our relationship with Canada, and we're currently in the midst of a steel and aluminum trade war. So if we're going to ask Canada to be our friend and our partner to clean up the mess, we need better relations with the country because they're a sovereign country and we can't tell them what to do. It's very much in our best interest that they clean up those mines and don't have other mines that threaten us into the future. So I'll be a strong advocate for keeping periodic tailings out of our waters in the Taku and the Stikine and the other transboundary rivers.
Great, thank you. From Kevin Allen, Dr. Gross, what committees in the U.S. Senate will you seek to serve on?
Yeah, well, I'd like to be on health, education, labor, and pensions. I'd like to be on commerce because of my commitment to the oceans and our fisheries. I'd like to be on armed services because of the major strategic importance of Alaska, and then Indian affairs for sure. I'd like to represent you in the Senate.
Great. From Paulette Marino in Sitka, dear Mr. Al Gross, how will you help Southeast villages regarding the limited Alaska Marine Highway service? This is and continues to limit access to our basic needs.
That's a great question and something very near and dear to me because I grew up on the ferries and I went to swim meets to Sitka, music festival, basketball games. I traveled back and forth to Petersburg for medical clinics on the ferry all the time, and my kids all grew up on the ferry, so I know how important it is, and I understand the structure, the payment system for the ferries. I would encourage the state of Alaska to make the ferries a separate corporation, like they did with the railroad, so it doesn't become politicized. But when I get to the federal or to the U.S. Senate, I've already looked at the FAST Act, and I do believe that there are more grant funds available for the ferries through the FAST Act. But if I can't get any more federal money through the FAST Act, then I'll introduce legislation that will help the ferry system, because these ferries transit federal waters, and it's a very unique federal highway system. So why shouldn't the federal government be more engaged? I think they should be.
Great. From Clarice Johnson, the ANCSA corporations are appealing to the Supreme Court regarding CARES Act funding. Do you think corporations should have the same rights as federally recognized tribes?
Well, I do believe that the corporation should have been entitled to CARES Act money, and an oversight by Dan Sullivan failing to address ambiguous language in the CARES Act has led to the ANCs not receiving $160 million of the CARES Act money, and I think that's terrible. That was almost approximately 1/5 of all the CARES Act money for Alaska. The native corporations, through their nonprofits, have structure in a way that they can deliver CARES Act relief in ways that the tribes can't. So I think both should be eligible for the money. And what the important part is that the money filters down to helping the people.
Thanks. From Patricia Alexander, what will you do to expand tribal judicial systems right away?
Well, I guess I'd want to work with you to figure out how we could do that. I recognize tribal sovereignty. So, if given that supposition, I would be trusting you to come up with a system that works for me or works for the federal government as well. And so very much empowering you to help come up with solutions on this.
Great. Another one from Jessica Dominy. How will you work on balancing the water health and tourism within Southeast Alaska?
Well, I understand how important all of them are, and I think I guess I have to go with my gut. And having been born and raised in Juneau, and having worked in Juneau as a doctor my whole life, I understand the how they all fit together, and how you can't have one without the other. The tourists wouldn't come here if we didn't have any trees, and, and you wouldn't live here if there weren't any fish. So we have to work together to create a symphony that works for everyone. And I know that's a difficult balance sometimes, and I know that not everybody's going to agree on these issues, but I think too much of one thing is bad for another, and we need to balance it all out.
Great. Um, Looks like maybe our last question from Harold Borbridge. What is your position on Pebble Mine?
Well, that's an easy one. I'm against Pebble Mine, and I have been ever since I gill netted up in Bristol Bay with Jim Beaton, who was the chairman of the State Board of Fish back then. And last year, I flew around to a bunch of the villages in the Bristol Bay region. I flew right over the top of the Pebble Mine, and it's a no-brainer. It's sitting right up in the headwaters of the Nushagak, and of course, the real mine is 20 times larger than what they've proposed. The peritic tailings will end up going downhill. There's just no question about it. It's just a question of how long it will take for that to happen. But I think in terms of geological time, not just a year or two. And I know that we have seismic activities here in Alaska too. There's just too much at risk out at Pebble, and too many of the indigenous people for food security, too many Alaska sport fishermen, Alaska commercial fishermen. It's 15,000 jobs a year. So when I get to the Senate, I will take action to stop the Pebble mine. And Dan Sullivan, after being chased into a corner and was caught on tape, or those hidden tapes came out with Tom Collier saying that basically Dan's in their back pocket. Dan all of a sudden said, oh, he's against the Pebble mine, but it takes action to stop the Pebble mine. You have to actually do something, and that would involve Section 404C of the Clean Water Act through the EPA, and getting them to reject the mine. And that's what I'll do when I get to the Senate. I'll work very hard to stop it.
Thanks.
And that's not to say I don't like mining. I grew up in Juneau, and of course we have the AJ mine, and we've got the Greens Creek in Kensington. There are ways to have mines that work, but you have to work with the people that live there and the people that are affected by it. And if the people there don't want it, then I wouldn't support it.
Thanks. Dr. Al, we respect your time and want to thank you for joining us. We appreciate that you've come forward and participated and answered these questions. So again, we want to respect your time. We know you only had 30 minutes today. I don't know if you have any parting words, but.
Well, I just wanted to say Gunal Shish, thank you very, very much. And I'm on my way to Sitka. I'll be there at the Net Shed this evening for those that want to come out and say hello. And I'd love to hear from you. And we're on the road for the next few days in Southeast Alaska. We're going to be in Ketchikan and Juneau as well, and then finishing out the campaign up here in Anchorage in the Mat-Su. I appreciate all of your input and your questions. I look forward to working with you after I win. And it's really an exciting time to help put our state back together and getting us going back in the right direction. Thank you. Gunal Shish.
Great, thank you. And again, appreciate your time. I want to remind folks watching, Tlingit Haida has chosen to be nonpartisan and neutral, and we've been offering these opportunities for all the candidates to present themselves and to be able to share their platforms, and then also to offer you those opportunities to ask the questions that are important to you. So before we close, we want to take this time and remind you to get out and vote. Polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on General Election Day on November 3rd. Deadline to receive absentee by electronic transmission ballot applications is 5 p.m. Alaska time on November 2nd. And if you submitted your absentee ballot by mail, it must be postmarked by November 3rd. So as we always do, we'll be closing out our session today with a random drawing. So if you haven't already done so, make sure to like our Facebook Live event for a chance to win a door prize. And while we wait for the last few likes, I'd like to thank our sponsors. These special candidate forums that are being hosted on Lunchtime Chat are sponsored by Get Out the Native Vote Southeast Alaska, which is a nonpartisan effort of Southeast Alaska Native entities and community volunteers to engage Alaska Natives, shareholders, and tribal citizens in voter participation during the 2020 elections. And our winners are, Albert Howard has won a David Boxley Formline t-shirt, and David Wahlberg has won a Hydro Flask. So Albert and David, if you message us your contact information, we'll get those mailed out to you right away. So thank you again, and Gunakchi Shawa to everybody for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion with U.S. Senate candidate Dr. Al Gross. Don't forget to join us for tomorrow's lunchtime chat with Senator Dan Sullivan and U.S. House candidate Elise Galvin. Thank you all, and be well.
Thank you.